Hi, my name is Elaine Porter. I walked into that ballroom in Savannah thinking I was there to support my husband, Richard, not to become the evening's cruelest joke. But there it was, my name card sitting neatly at our table, printed in big, bold letters for everyone to see. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe the printer got it wrong. Maybe someone's idea of humor had gone horribly off track. But then I heard it. The laughter. Not the polite kind you hear at fancy events. Number. This was sharp, knowing. The kind that slices right into your skin. I turned my head, and there they were. Richard, my husband of 18 years, looking perfectly at ease in his tailored tux, and Vivian, his older sister, his business partner, and the self-appointed queen of our little empire of high-end restaurants. Vivian leaned forward, her lips curling into that smile she saves for special occasions, the ones where she's holding the knife. "Now they all know who you really are, Elaine," she said sweetly, loud enough for the table, and the next one over, to hear. People chuckled. A man I'd never met looked at me like I'd just confirmed some long-standing rumor. Someone whispered, "Bless her heart," in that syrupy southern tone that pretends to be kind, but stings worse than the insult itself. In that moment, I wanted to grab the card, tear it in half, and throw it in Vivian's face. I wanted to walk out of that ballroom, let the doors slam so hard the chandeliers rattled. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. Small, controlled, polite, and I slid that card into my clutch like it was nothing more than a menu. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew things about both of them, about their business, their finances, their secrets, that nobody else in this room could even imagine. And with just the right words, whispered to the right person, I could light a fuse that would burn their empire to the ground. I didn't know it yet, but that fuse had already been lit, and in just 7 days, they would be sitting exactly where they'd put me tonight. Exposed, powerless, and watching it all crumble. When Richard and I first stepped into the ballroom, my hands were already damp. The air was thick with perfume and the faint bite of champagne. Strings of white lights hung from the high, arched ceilings, glittering above rows of linen-covered tables set with polished silver. It was the kind of room where every flaw feels magnified, where people's eyes linger a little too long, their smiles just a little too rehearsed. I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin, telling myself I could belong here. This wasn't my first gala, but it was the first since Richard's company had opened its 3rd location on the riverfront. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a way to show the movers and shakers of Savannah that the Porters weren't just another business family, but the family to know. My dress was a deep forest green, chosen carefully to be elegant but understated, the kind of dress that whispered confidence without screaming for attention. I'd even splurged on a pair of vintage earrings, small gold leaves, that reminded me of the oak trees back home. Richard hadn't said much on the way over, just a quick, "Try to relax, Elaine. It's good for us to be seen here." As if blending into this world of champagne toasts and charity auctions was as easy as changing shoes. I followed him to our table, my eyes scanning the room for familiar faces. That's when I saw it, that little rectangle of cardstock waiting for me, not Mrs. Elaine Porter, not even just Elaine. 2 words, charity case. At first I thought it had to be some bad joke by a bored event planner, but then Vivian's laughter cut through the low hum of conversation, and I knew better. She was leaning toward Richard, whispering something that made him chuckle without even looking at me. Vivian has always had a way of making cruelty sound like wit. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't even break that perfect posture. But she knows exactly how to slip the blade in where it hurts most. I froze, my hand hovering above the back of my chair. I could feel my pulse in my ears. A woman at the next table tilted her head toward me, murmuring something to her husband. He glanced at my card, then at me, and smirked. The same look the mean girls used to give in high school when they decided you were tonight's entertainment. I lowered myself into the chair, my fingers tightening around the clutch where I'd hidden the card. I told myself to breathe evenly, to keep my smile in place. The clinking of glasses and bursts of polite laughter swirled around me, but I didn't hear a word of it. My mind was already spinning through the years I'd spent in this family. I'd given up a career I loved, sold my own condo, poured every ounce of my energy into building their dream. Not just for Richard, but for Vivian too. I'd worked behind the scenes when the first restaurant opened, balancing accounts late into the night, calling in favors from friends in Atlanta to get them suppliers at better rates. And now, here I was, nothing more than a punchline in front of a room full of people who mattered to them. Vivian raised her glass in my direction, her smile widening. "Lighten up, Elaine. It's just a little fun." I sipped my champagne and set the glass down with care. I didn't reply. I've learned that silence, when used right, can cut deeper than shouting. As the evening dragged on, I forced myself to laugh when expected, to nod at conversations I barely heard. I watched Richard work the room, his arm occasionally draped around Vivian as they greeted investors and chefs like royalty. To anyone watching, I was the quiet, loyal wife, the one who knew her place. But in my mind, a different picture was forming. I was done being their afterthought, done letting them define me. Vivian thought she could humiliate me into disappearing quietly. Richard thought I'd keep smiling and supporting him no matter what. They didn't realize I'd been keeping my own mental ledger for years. Every slight, every deception, every cut disguised as kindness. And now I was ready to collect. Elaine's hands might have been steady on her glass that night, but her mind was anything but. In that room full of polished silver and polite cruelty, she knew one thing. This wasn't the end of her place in the Porter family. It was the beginning of the end for theirs. When I got home that night, the sound of the ballroom still clung to me. The clinking glasses, the bursts of laughter, Vivian's voice curling through the air like smoke. I set my clutch on the kitchen counter and just stared at it. The weight of that folded name card pressing against the leather like a bruise I couldn't hide. And then the memories started coming. It was 12 years ago, back in Atlanta. I was in my office staring at a promotion letter I'd been working toward for nearly 3 years. Senior financial analyst, more responsibility, more pay, a seat at the table I'd been clawing my way toward since I was 23. My phone rang. It was Richard. "Vivian's ready to open the first restaurant," he said. "She wants me on board full time, but the thing is, we can't make it work unless we sell the condo." I remember glancing at the framed photo on my desk, me holding the keys the day I bought that place. My first real accomplishment that no one could take from me. "You're saying, sell my condo?" I asked. "It's not just your condo, Elaine," Richard said, his voice warm, persuasive. "It's our future. This is an investment in both of us. We'll rebuild together." I could hear the excitement in his voice, and I wanted to match it. I wanted to be the kind of wife who believed in her husband's dreams. So I called my realtor that same week. 2 months later, the condo was gone. My promotion letter sat at the bottom of a drawer, and I was working nights and weekends in Vivian's cramped, half-finished restaurant, balancing invoices and organizing vendor lists for free. Vivian called me her rock back then, said she didn't know what she'd do without me. I let those words blind me to the fact that there was no contract, no stake, no official recognition of my role, just gratitude and promises. At first it was small things, Vivian making suggestions about my clothes before company events. "You're meeting investors, Elaine. Try something that doesn't scream department store." Or Richard dismissing my advice when I pointed out overspending on the menu redesign. "You wouldn't get it," he'd say with a smile that made it sound like a joke. "Vivian and I know this business better than you." Family dinners were worse. Vivian would hand me serving trays while she discussed expansion plans with Richard. "Elaine, grab more drinks, will you?" "Oh, and clear these plates while we finish up." I told myself it was just her personality. Bossy, commanding. I even laughed it off with friends, saying, "That's just Vivian." But every time it chipped away at something inside me. There's one memory I can't shake, no matter how hard I try. It was a summer evening, humid and heavy, the kind that makes the air feel thick. We were at Vivian's house for a staff barbecue. I just stepped out onto the patio with a plate of food when I heard her voice, low but sharp, floating across the yard. "She's lucky you even married her, Richard. Don't let her forget where she came from." I froze, and then I heard it. Richard's chuckle. Not a protest, not a defense. Just that little laugh, like her words didn't bother him at all. I told myself maybe I'd misheard. Maybe they didn't mean it like that. But deep down, I knew. Back then, I saw my role as keeping the peace. I told myself I was the glue holding things together. Smoothing over Richard's temper when vendors didn't deliver on time, stepping in when Vivian barked at staff in front of customers, quietly fixing accounting mistakes so no one else had to know. When the second restaurant opened, I was there every day for the first month, setting up the books, training the office staff, even making coffee runs when the team was too busy. I never asked for credit. I thought that's what family did. Show up, give your best, and trust it would come back to you. I didn't realize I was teaching them something else entirely, that I was someone who wouldn't demand payment, someone who would swallow the insults, someone they could push aside when it suited them. There were moments that should have been warning signs. The time Richard told me not to bother coming to a networking dinner because it's more of a business crowd. The time Vivian forgot to put my name on the guest list for a holiday gala, then handed me an apron when I showed up anyway. The way they'd exchange glances when I offered an idea, like they were humoring me before moving on. I ignored them all. Sitting in that ballroom tonight with that name card burning in my clutch, I understood something I hadn't wanted to face. Those little moments over the years weren't harmless. They were rehearsals. Vivian's sly remarks, Richard's easy dismissals, the way I'd been kept just outside the real decisions. It had all been leading to this, to a night where they could humiliate me in front of Savannah's elite and know I wouldn't fight back. Except this time, they were wrong. I sipped my champagne, the bubbles sharp against my tongue, and let my eyes roam the room. The chandeliers shimmered overhead, casting golden light over the crowd. Vivian was holding court at the far end of the table, her laugh carrying above the music. Richard leaned in to whisper something, and she smiled like a cat that had cornered its prey. They thought I was still that woman who sold her condo, gave up her career, scrubbed dishes in their kitchen, and stayed silent when insulted. They thought I hadn't learned. But every slight, every smirk, every dismissal had taught me something. How to wait, how to watch, how to collect the little pieces of information that no one else noticed, and most importantly, how to choose the right moment to use them. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was coming, sooner than they thought. That night after the gala, I didn't go to bed. I sat at our kitchen table long after Richard had fallen asleep in the guest room. His new habit when he came home, too tired to talk. The house was quiet, except for the slow tick of the wall clock and the occasional hum of the fridge. The forest green clutch from the gala sat in front of me. Inside, the name card waited like a dare. But I didn't take it out. I already knew what it said. What I wanted now was something else entirely. At the back of the hall closet, behind a pile of old coats, there was a fireproof box I hadn't opened in years. The key was still tucked inside the hem of a scarf, a hiding place Richard had never noticed. I set the box on the table, the metal cold under my hands, and turned the key. Inside were folders thick with old contracts, receipts, and meeting notes from the early days of the restaurant. I'd kept everything, partly out of habit, partly because some part of me didn't trust Vivian's "we'll take care of you" promises. The papers smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. I flipped through them slowly, my fingertips brushing over typed pages and my own scribbled notes in the margins. Schedules I'd drawn up when we opened our first location, vendor agreements I'd negotiated, handwritten checklists for inventory and payroll. Halfway through the stack, I found an early draft of the partnership agreement for River Bend Dining Group, the legal umbrella for all of Vivian's restaurants. There, under founding members, my name was listed alongside Richard's and Vivian's. I remember the day that draft was printed. Vivian had called me her secret weapon and told me we were building something that would outlast all of us. I believed her, but as I dug deeper, I found the final signed version of the same document. My name was gone. At first, I thought it might have been a clerical error. My pulse quickened as I searched for an explanation. That's when I saw it. An email printed and stapled to the back. It was from Vivian to the company's attorney, dated 2 weeks before the incorporation papers were filed. Remove Elaine's name from all partnership agreements. She's family. She won't need a stake. The words hit me like ice water down my spine. Short, cold, final. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Vivian hadn't just failed to include me. She had made sure I was erased. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Memories flooded in, now with a different clarity. Richard brushing off my questions about financial reports with, "Don't worry about that stuff, focus on us." Vivian patting my hand after a long day, saying, "You're so good at supporting us, Elaine. That's what keeps this family strong." The way decisions were always made behind closed doors, then presented to me as a done deal. It had all been smoke and mirrors, a way to keep me working for free while convincing me I was part of something bigger. I expected to feel that same hot, choking anger I'd felt at the gala. But this was different. This was cold, sharp, focused. They hadn't just humiliated me in public. They had stolen from me. Years of work, my financial security, my sense of worth. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't about asking them to make it right. That would be like asking a fox to apologize for stealing chickens. If I wanted justice, I was going to have to take it. I gathered every document that mentioned my name, every draft of the agreements, every email Vivian had ever sent me in those early years. I sorted them into neat stacks, sliding them into a large manila envelope. Then I found a legal pad and started making a list. Dates of key meetings. Who was present? Projects I'd handled personally. Witnesses who could confirm my involvement. I realized something as I wrote. I'd spent so many years quietly keeping the machine running, I knew exactly where all the moving parts were, and I knew which ones they didn't want anyone to see. Before I could second-guess myself, I pulled out my phone. I typed a short message to Richard. "I'm going through some old paperwork tonight. We need to talk." I didn't send it for a response. I sent it to see what he'd do. It took less than 5 minutes for my phone to buzz. "Stop digging through old stuff, Elaine. It's not healthy. Let it go." I stared at the screen. He didn't even pretend not to know what I was referring to. That told me everything. That night, as I boxed up the documents, a memory surfaced from the first year we opened the second location. We'd been in the office late, going over vendor contracts. Vivian had stepped outside to take a call, and Richard leaned over my desk. "You know she'll never treat you like a partner, right?" he'd said, almost casually. I'd laughed it off back then. "I'm married to her partner, Richard. That's enough." But he'd just smirked. "If you say so." By the time the clock struck midnight, I'd made up my mind. This wasn't about saving my marriage. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about making sure they never got to decide my worth again. And to do that, I needed someone who knew exactly how Vivian operated. Someone who understood her tactics, and better yet, her weak spots. I thought of a name I hadn't spoken in years. Mark Caldwell. Mark was an attorney who'd worked with Vivian in the early days, before she'd surrounded herself with a newer, more loyal team. Back then, he'd been kind to me. The kind that comes from respect, not pity. We'd lost touch after he and Vivian had a falling out over creative differences. I'd never known the details. If anyone could tell me whether I had a legal case and how to build it quietly, it would be Mark. I pulled out my phone and typed his name into the search bar. The first result was a small law office in Savannah. The photo on the website showed him older, grayer, but still with that steady gaze I remembered. I didn't call him that night. Not yet. This kind of move needed to be deliberate. If I reached out too soon, word could get back to Vivian. She had ears everywhere, in the company, in the restaurants, even among friends who'd happily trade gossip for favors. Instead, I drafted an email on a private account I'd set up years ago for online shopping. No connection to our home network. No way for Richard to stumble across it. Mark, it's been a long time. I need to discuss something important with you, and it has to stay between us. Are you available to meet in person? Elaine Porter. I didn't hit send, not yet, but the draft sat there, ready. I closed the box, slid it back into the closet, and tucked the key into my scarf again. The house was still silent, but the air felt different. Charged, like the space between two storm clouds just before the lightning strikes. For the first time in years, I felt awake. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor. It should have felt warm, comforting, but it didn't. It felt fake, like everything else in my life lately. I reached for my phone before I even got out of bed. There was a text from Richard, sent sometime after midnight. Hope you've calmed down. That scene you caused at the gala? Not a good look. That was his favorite phrase whenever he wanted me to shut up and fall back in line. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumbs hovering above the keyboard before typing exactly what he wanted to hear. You're right. I overreacted. I'm sorry for embarrassing you. I hated every word, but this wasn't about my pride anymore. This was about keeping them comfortable, letting them believe I was still the docile wife who folded under pressure. His reply came quickly. Good. Let's not make things worse. Just stay out of Vivian's way for now. She's under a lot of pressure. Pressure? He had no idea. By mid-morning, I'd transformed myself into exactly what they expected to see. Messy bun, no makeup, oversized sweater, a picture of a woman licking her wounds. If Richard stopped by unexpectedly, or if word reached Vivian through one of her loyalists, they'd see a nobody. The role they'd already written for me. But underneath, I was sharpening my knives. That afternoon, I traded the sweater for a tailored navy coat and headed downtown. My heels clicked against the cobblestone sidewalks of Savannah's historic district, the air scented with coffee and faint traces of the river. The cafe was tucked between two brick buildings, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. Mark Caldwell was already there, sitting in the far corner, nursing a black coffee. He stood when he saw me, his eyes scanning my face like he was reading between the lines. Elaine, he said warmly, pulling me into a brief hug. It's been too long. Too long, I agreed, sliding into the booth across from him. We exchanged a few pleasantries, the weather, his practice, a passing joke about how Savannah never really changes, but I couldn't afford small talk. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Mark, I need help, and I need you to keep this between us. He studied me for a moment, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. If this is about Vivian, you're not the first person to come to me with complaints, but your family, that makes it messy. I was family, I corrected. Now I'm just a tool they used until I outlived my usefulness. I told him enough to get his attention. How I'd contributed to the company in its early stages, the documents I'd found, the email instructing the attorney to remove my name from the agreements. I didn't show him everything yet. I still didn't trust anyone enough for that. But I gave him the outline. If what you're saying is true, Mark said slowly, it's more than unethical. Depending on the agreements in place, it could be illegal. You could have a strong claim. The word illegal landed in my chest like a spark catching dry kindling. And there's more, he added, leaning in. Vivian's made a lot of enemies over the years. Ruthless leaders always do. If we can find the right person, someone might be willing to help from the inside. An insider. The thought hadn't even occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. Vivian was meticulous, but she wasn't careful with people she considered beneath her. I'd seen her bark at junior staff, take credit for their work, humiliate them in front of clients. Mark promised to discreetly feel around, see if anyone might be receptive. We parted with a handshake that carried more weight than I'd expected. 2 days later, I walked into Marigold and Vine, one of Vivian's favorite luxury boutiques. Just being there made my stomach churn. I remembered the time she'd brought me here years ago, telling me she wanted to upgrade my look, then spending the afternoon pointing out all the things I couldn't afford. The same clerk from that day stood behind the counter, her smile polite but cold. "Mrs. Porter," she said, "we haven't seen you in a while." "I know," I replied, feigning a nervous laugh. Things got tense with Vivian after the gala. I thought maybe I could find her something as an apology. I lowered my voice conspiratorially, as though sharing a secret. Gossip traveled fast in Savannah, and I wanted this breadcrumb to reach exactly the right ears. As I browsed, pretending to debate between handbags, a young woman in a black blazer approached me. She wasn't a salesperson. Too nervous, eyes darting toward the clerk, then back to me. Without a word, she slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand and walked away. I waited until I was back in my car to open it. The handwriting was hurried, almost shaky. "I know what Vivian did to you. Call me, Lydia." Beneath it was a phone number. That night, I called her from a prepaid phone I'd picked up on my way home. Lydia's voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke. "I've been working for her for 2 years," she said. "I've seen what she does to people, employees, suppliers, even family. I can't do it anymore." "What do you want?" I asked bluntly. "Money," she answered without hesitation, "and protection if this blows up. In exchange, I can get you proof, emails, expense reports, things that would ruin her if they went public." "What kind of proof?" "She's been funneling company money for personal use, lavish trips billed as executive retreats, fake invoices, private expenses run through the business. I can get you everything." After we hung up, I called Mark. His voice was low, measured. "If what Lydia says is true, this isn't just a family squabble. It's criminal. If this gets to the board, Vivian's finished." By midnight, Lydia had sent me the first batch of documents, meticulously organized PDFs pulled from Vivian's files, dates, signatures, line items that read like a how-to manual for embezzlement. I didn't sign my name to anything. I didn't leave a trace. I simply forwarded the files anonymously to a journalist Mark trusted. The fuse had been lit. The next morning, whispers began circulating among Vivian's senior staff. Questions about budget overruns, speculation about executive perks. I kept my head down, played the part of the subdued, embarrassed wife, still licking her wounds from the gala. If Vivian noticed me at all, it would be to dismiss me. That was exactly what I wanted, because wolves never expect the sheep to bare their teeth. The first thing I learned from Mark was this: you don't need to take them down in one swing, Elaine. Let them sweat first. Fear makes people sloppy. I took his advice to heart. For the next few days, I perfected my disguise. Messy bun, minimal makeup, slouchy sweaters. The picture of a woman still too embarrassed to show her face after making a scene at the gala. Richard came home late most nights, muttering about work and putting out fires. I made sure to keep my voice soft, my eyes downcast. "How was your day?" I'd ask, stirring a pot of soup like nothing had changed. "Busy, Vivian's stressed. She doesn't need you in her way right now," he'd reply. I'd nod and murmur, "Of course." Inside, I was counting the hours until the next spark hit the tinder. That Thursday afternoon, I strolled into Riverbend Cafe, one of Vivian's smaller properties, and made sure to be seen by two of her most loyal gossip channels. A pair of middle-aged sisters who'd run the hostess stand since day one. I let them overhear me telling the barista I was thinking of making amends with Vivian, maybe buying her a little gift. I leaned in like I was sharing something intimate. She's under so much pressure right now. I just want to show her I still care. I knew it would get back to her by the end of the day, and I wanted her to believe it. By Friday, the online forums for Vivian's restaurant group were buzzing. Anonymous posts hinted at irregularities in executive spending. One even read, "If this hits the board, she's done." I smiled at my coffee cup and closed my laptop. Chaos was brewing, but I needed to stay still. If Vivian suspected me too soon, she might start cleaning up the mess before it grew big enough to bury her. That afternoon, Richard told me I had to attend a prep meeting at Vivian's headquarters. "It'll look good if you show support," he said. What he really meant was, "Don't embarrass me by hiding." When I walked into her glass-walled office, Vivian barely glanced up. "Oh," she said flatly, "Elaine's here." Around the table, a few executives smirked. I took a seat at the far end, gripping the chair's edge to keep my composure. Vivian's voice was sugar over steel. "Since you're here, try to follow along. This isn't dinner party talk. It's business." Laughter rippled through the room. Someone muttered something about centerpieces. I kept my smile in place. Let them think I was the punchline. They didn't realize they were sitting in a room with someone who already knew where the bodies were buried. That night, as I was rinsing dishes, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. "You've poked a viper," he said. "She's panicking and looking for someone to crush. She's having your finances pulled apart. Bank statements, credit history, everything." "Let her dig," I said calmly. "Elaine, I'm serious. She wants to destroy you before anything reaches the board." I paused, then asked, "Mark, what do you think scares her more, being exposed or not knowing who's holding the knife?" He sighed. "Don't get reckless." "I'm not reckless," I replied. "I'm precise." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and created a burner email account. I typed one line. "You've made a mistake. Watch the board. No name. No signature." Sent directly to her corporate inbox. It wasn't about giving her answers. It was about taking away her sense of control, making her wonder who else knew, how deep it went, and how close she was to losing everything. 2 days later, Richard came home in a foul mood. "Vivian's furious," he said, pouring himself a drink. "Someone's been spreading lies in the company. She thinks it's a former employee." I hid my smile behind my coffee mug. Perfect. Let her look everywhere but here. That night, Lydia called from her own prepaid phone. "She's unraveling," Lydia whispered. "She yelled at a supplier on speakerphone today in front of the whole office. I've got more files for you, this time with her signature right next to the false expense codes." She sent them over within the hour. I forwarded them to the journalist without hesitation. "This batch," Mark said when I showed him, "is enough to force an audit. Once the board sees it, they'll have no choice but to act." I didn't push the story any further. The point was not to attack all at once. It was to let the pressure build until Vivian's own paranoia did half my work for me. Over the next few days, I made a point of being seen in places I knew her spies frequented. The farmer's market, the bakery near her office, always looking thoughtful, sometimes even smiling to myself. I wanted her to think I was plotting. I wanted her to waste her energy trying to figure out how much I knew. Because in the end, the most dangerous enemy is the one who doesn't swing until they're sure it's going to land. On Wednesday morning, Richard's voice came from the doorway of my home office. "Vivian wants to see you. Her office. Today." There was no explanation, no chance to negotiate. I closed my notebook, slid my pen into place, and stood up. My pulse was steady, because I knew the trap was set. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. The walls gleamed, mirrors catching my reflection in pieces. Navy blazer, calm expression, a woman who looked like she belonged in any corporate suite, but inside my focus was razor sharp. Today wasn't about surviving Vivian's wrath. It was about ending her reign. When I stepped into the boardroom, the air was thick with tension. Vivian sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her red suit immaculate, her smile tight enough to cut glass. Richard was beside her, arms crossed, jaw set. Around them, the board members, 7 in total, murmured in low voices. Some looked curious, others uneasy. "Elaine," Vivian said sweetly, though her eyes were hard, "thank you for joining us. We wanted to clear the air." Her "we" made me want to laugh. This wasn't a group effort. This was her stage. Vivian leaned forward, clasping her hands. "There have been rumors, accusations. I've been told you may have been involved in spreading false information about this company." I tilted my head. "False?" "Yes." Her voice sharpened. "Financial misconduct, inappropriate spending, nonsense designed to damage our reputation." One of the older board members cleared his throat. "Vivian, with respect, some of these claims came with documentation." Vivian's smile didn't falter, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. "Fabricated," she insisted, "likely by a disgruntled ex-employee." I folded my hands on the table. "If it's all fabricated, then you won't mind if I share a few things I've brought." Richard shifted in his chair. "Elaine." I ignored him and slid a slim folder across the table to the board's chairwoman, a woman named Eleanor Brooks. Eleanor's sharp eyes met mine before she began flipping through the pages. Emails, expense reports, copies of corporate credit card statements with charges for private villas in the Caribbean, labeled as training retreats. Airfare for Vivian's family billed as vendor meetings. Jewelry listed under client gifts. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Vivian, these documents bear your signature." Vivian's voice stayed cool. "They're taken out of context. All expenses were approved through proper channels." "That's interesting," I said, my tone light. "Because I also have a memo from your own CFO questioning these charges. A memo you ignored." I slid another paper forward. Lydia had delivered this one just 2 nights ago. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Elaine, enough!" Richard snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about. You've been out of the loop for years." I turned to him slowly. "Out of the loop because you made sure I was. I built the foundation of this company, Richard. I negotiated the vendor contracts. I handled payroll in the early days. I was supposed to be a founding partner." A murmur rippled through the room. "And yet," I continued, locking eyes with Vivian, 2 weeks before incorporation, my name vanished from the partnership agreement, at your instruction." Eleanor glanced at me. "Do you have proof of that?" I slid the final piece forward. A printed email from Vivian to the company's attorney. The words were clear, undeniable. "Remove Elaine's name from all partnership agreements. She's family. She won't need a stake." Vivian's face went pale beneath her makeup. One of the younger board members leaned back. "Vivian, if even half of this is accurate, we have a serious problem." "It's all accurate," I said quietly. "And the journalist you've been trying to trace for the last 2 weeks? They already have everything. The only reason this hasn't hit the papers yet is because I asked them to hold it until today." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and set it on the table. "One text from me, and it's public by dinner." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. The balance in the room had shifted. I could feel it. The board members were no longer looking to Vivian for answers. They were looking at each other. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "Vivian, I'm calling for an emergency vote to remove you as CEO, effective immediately pending a full audit." Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Richard," she hissed, turning to my husband, "say something." But Richard was staring at the table, his face unreadable. "I can't defend this, Viv." It was the first time I'd seen her truly falter. The board voted 6-1 in favor of removal. Eleanor's gavel struck the table once, sharp and final. Vivian, you are hereby suspended from all company operations. Security will escort you out. 2 uniformed guards appeared at the door as if they'd been waiting. Vivian gathered her things with trembling hands, her eyes burning into me. "This isn't over," she whispered. "It is for me," I replied. Once she was gone, the board began discussing interim leadership. I stayed quiet. My part was done. Eleanor finally turned to me. "Elaine, if you're willing, we'd like you to consult during the audit. Your insight could be invaluable." I smiled faintly. "We'll see." Because the truth was, I hadn't decided if I wanted any part of this company anymore. My goal had never been to take over, only to make sure they could never erase me again. As I stepped out into the bright Savannah sunlight, the air felt lighter. The streets buzzed with the hum of a normal afternoon, tourists with cameras, the distant sound of a street musician's saxophone. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Vivian was out. Richard was exposed, and I had done it on my terms. 3 days after the boardroom vote, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Not the heavy, angry kind, but a soft, steady rain, like the city itself was taking a breath. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's agenda pressing on my chest. I decided to take a walk down to River Street, umbrella in hand. The cobblestones were slick, reflecting the muted colors of shop fronts and the gray-blue shimmer of the Savannah River. Tourists were thin that morning, their chatter replaced by the low hum of passing barges. I found myself stopping at the wrought iron railing overlooking the water. This was where Richard and I had walked the night before we opened the first restaurant. He'd talked about building a legacy, and I'd believed him, foolishly thinking I was part of that dream. Now, standing there alone, I realized something important. The legacy was never the restaurants. It was me. It was what I had built, what I had survived. Back at my townhouse, I pulled an old cardboard box from the top shelf of the closet. Inside were scraps of a life I'd nearly forgotten. My first business license, photos from vendor trips, even handwritten recipes from the early kitchen staff, and at the very bottom, folded neatly, was the place card from that awful gala, the one that had labeled me charity case. I smoothed it out on the table, the letters still sharp in black ink. I thought about keeping it as a reminder, proof of what they'd tried to make me. Instead, I walked it straight to the trash. Because I didn't need reminders anymore. I knew exactly who I was. My phone rang just after noon. It was Eleanor Brooks from the board. "We're moving forward with the audit," she said. "It's worse than we thought. But Elaine, the board wants to offer you an advisory role. Full pay, flexible hours. You wouldn't answer to anyone but me." I hesitated. The offer was tempting, but stepping back into that world felt like walking into a cage, even if I held the key this time. "Eleanor," I said carefully, "I'm honored. But I think my future is somewhere else." I didn't fight to take back a seat at that table. I fought to prove I didn't need it. She was silent for a moment, then said, "I respect that. And I hope you know, you made the right kind of history here." That evening, I sat at my desk with a fresh notebook and began writing. Not a tell-all, not revenge, just the truth, from my side, about how easily we give away pieces of ourselves in the name of loyalty, and how hard but necessary it is to take them back. I didn't know yet if it would become a book, a blog, or just a personal journal, but it felt good to put the words somewhere other than my own head. Later, I poured myself a glass of wine and cooked dinner. Not for Richard, not for guests, just for me. Seared salmon, roasted asparagus, and the good china I'd kept boxed up for special occasions. Halfway through the meal, I realized this was the first time in years I'd eaten alone without feeling lonely. In the weeks that followed, Savannah began to feel new again. I spent afternoons exploring parts of the city I'd ignored for decades, lingering in bookstores, chatting with local artists, even volunteering at the food bank. People who'd only ever known me as Richard's wife or Vivian's sister-in-law started to see me differently. Or maybe I was finally letting them see me. One afternoon, I ran into Lydia outside a coffee shop. She looked lighter, happier. "They tried to scare me after you left," she admitted. "But when the audit started, they backed off. You saved me more than you know." I smiled. We saved each other. Richard called once. His voice was small, almost uncertain. "I just wanted to say I didn't know it would go this far." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "You knew enough, Richard. You just chose the wrong side." And I hung up. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was simply done. On a crisp Saturday morning, I walked along the river again, coffee in hand. The air smelled of salt and fresh bread from a nearby bakery. For the first time, I didn't think about the past when I stood at the railing. I thought about what was next. The trips I'd take, the business ideas I'd been too afraid to try, the quiet mornings I'd protect like treasures. Freedom wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or applause. It was the simple, steady knowledge that no one else got to define me anymore. You don't need a title to have worth. You don't need permission to stand up. And love, for yourself, for your own life, doesn't ask for credit. It simply shows up and stays. In the end, Elaine learned that freedom isn't something others can give you. It's something you claim for yourself. She walked away not with revenge, but with her dignity, her peace, and the knowledge that she mattered all along. You don't need a title to be a parent. You don't need permission to show up. And love, real love, doesn't ask for credit. It simply stays. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember you matter, and your love leaves a mark.